we have actually a really great group of speakers here who represent a lot of different aspects of social commerce. And so what I wanted to do was start off by having, let's start off with Brian at the end there, who is one of the founders of Airbnb and is definitely in the anti-portfolio for Floodgate. We actually heard the pitch for Airbnb right before they went live in the Democratic Convention. Whenever I'm asked which company I regret not investing in, the number one answer for me is Airbnb. So bring on the pain.
Just introduction.
Yeah, introduction. Tell us a little bit about your company and a little bit about your background.
Excellent. So yeah, I'm Brian Chesky. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Airbnb.com. We are a community marketplace where you can list and book all sorts of unique spaces around the world. We like to say anything from a private apartment to a private island. So it's all sorts of spaces from a night to a year. We're in 10,000 cities. Travelers came last year from every country on the planet, but North Korea and the Congo. So we're literally in 192 countries around the world. And we really started in New York City. We started getting a lot of traction about 2 years ago, and it's really taken off since then. And we're in about 10,000 cities, and we this is a business that was somewhat serendipitously started. I had moved up from Los Angeles to San Francisco about 3 years ago, and we weren't able to, with my college roommate at the time, and we weren't able to make rent, and Design Conference was coming to San Francisco. All the hotels Design Conference were sold out, and I had originally quit my job, and I think I had $1,000 in the bank account. This is October 2007, so probably not like really good planning, obviously, and I was, and I get to San Francisco, and I realized rent was $1,150. So we already had a math problem right there. And we didn't know what to do. This conference was coming to San Francisco. All the hotels are sold out. We had this idea, why don't we create a bed and breakfast for the conference? And that was the vision. So the vision, there was no business plan. The vision was let's make rent for the month of October. That was the business plan, basically. And so we created, I told Joe, well, we don't have any furniture, so we can't create a bed and breakfast. He said, well, Brian, we have a few air beds in the closet. We blew up some air beds. We called it the Air Bed and Breakfast. It was a temporary bed and breakfast. We ended up making, I think, like $1,000 by hosting a bunch of people that week. And that was supposed to be it. And over the next few months, people started saying they love to use the site, or it would be awesome if they could go somewhere and use it. So I don't know how long, just keep it kind of. So I'm not going to go into the full story, except to say that we started our business to solve our own problem, and our own problem was to make rent. And we like to say what started as a living room, an airbed in a living room, is now spread to 10,000 cities around the world. So.
Thanks, Greg.
Hi, Greg Fantz. I am the Chief Marketing Officer of One Kings Lane. I joined late last year after 10 years at eBay in a wide variety of roles over 10 years in marketing, general management, and products. I saw quite a few things happen over the course of the 2000s. And prior to that, worked at Coca-Cola in classic marketing, classic brand management. We're a company founded just about 2 years ago by Susan Feldman and Allison Pink, is really focused on the home and living space. And we're just laser focused on driving deep and delivering on the consumer needs and also the industry needs in a very fragmented industry that's been very challenged with the downturn of the economy. We're grounded in sales events, but you've probably seen over time that we're growing into new forms of e-commerce, better ways to serve products to our consumers, and really delivering a great curated, branded experience in many, many interesting ways, and really trying to weave commerce and content together, tell an interesting story, and then attach products around those stories, which really I don't think has been done. It was sort of the promise of the internet in the early 2000s. We're going to try to crack that with a deep focus on home and living.
My name is Brett Garrett of Bain Capital Ventures, which is a venture and growth equity investment arm of Bain Capital. We're kind of deeply involved in lots of social and e-commerce and social e-commerce companies, from LinkedIn to Rent the Runway, which is a kind of a high-end dress rental, the Netflix of dresses, we like to call that. The Find, which is a vertical search for shopping. Buy With Me, which is a kind of group buying website. And we're looking to invest in a lot more, so I'll be representing the VC part of the room.
My name is Brett Kynes. I'm an 08 grad of the GSB, and I work with Groupon. My official title is Director of Social. I'm in the product management group. And my background is primarily in social, so building sort of apps on the Facebook platform, on the Twitter platform, and at Groupon I do a lot of new product development.
And sort of last, I'm Ann Miraco. I'll be moderating this session. I'm an investor at Floodgate, and I've invested in a couple social commerce companies. In our portfolio, we have a company called Chegg, which is textbook rentals, and I'm also on the board of ModCloth, which is a good example of social commerce in the fashion space. So I wanted to kick off this conversation. There's a lot of different opinions as to what social commerce means. Everyone talks about social commerce, but they seem to be talking about it in a lot of different ways. So I wanted to go down this group and just tell us from your perspective, what are some of the defining characteristics of social commerce?
Yeah, I mean, social commerce is definitely a big buzzword these days. I think the way I think about it, and I think the way we think about it at Groupon, is a lot of the way that Facebook defines sort of this concept of a graph, right? So a lot of people will say, you throw Facebook Connect on a website and now you've got social commerce. Well, that's not really fundamentally how it works. It's not just about sort of virality and sharing through the news feed to your friends whenever you buy something. That's not truly social. I think you have to figure out what your business is and what the nodes within your business are. For us, it's local businesses and consumers, and how we connect those two through commerce, through a transaction, right? So that's primarily how I think about social commerce, and permissions play a big part of that. So the permission of how you can engage with the consumer, how you can get them to be open to receiving messages or want to receive these sort of messages. That's really what Facebook, I think, has done the best of out of anyone in enabling these, this two-way communication channel between friends. And the same thing applies for local businesses. It applies to home manufacturers. It applies to people who have an apartment or an air bed and breakfast that they want to connect with other consumers. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yep, I think I would agree with that, and I think in general, social e-commerce is a pretty unuseful label because it is so broad and so undefined. But I think within it, there are really interesting businesses and there are really uninteresting business in terms of what social commerce is. And so I think there's one social commerce where you just take your business and you have Facebook Connect and now it's social commerce. And then there's another where you're really doing something new. You're either taking social activities offline and you're kind of facilitating them through the web somehow, or you're creating totally new behaviors like Airbnb that are only possible because of the web, and you're able to kind of create a commerce platform that way, with social connections. And so I think, in that spectrum, I think the more interesting ones are the ones where, you're not just, sticking some kind of Facebook Connect or some social kind of label on something that you're already doing, but you're really kind of imagining something very new and something that's available to do only now because there is a social graph that you can leverage. So I'd make that distinction.
Same opinion. I think the basics is wiring your setup to share is really just the basics. But how we're thinking about things is, how do consumers really start influencing our shelves in real time? How does our inventory shift as our consumer needs shift around that? How do we really co-opt our consumers into becoming our sales force, our merchandising team, our customer support team? Is how do you incent them? How do you arm them? How do you encourage them authentically to go to work on your behalf because they love your brand? I don't think companies have really done that well authentically. That's the magic word, is scale, authentically, cost effective. And while there has been a big fixation for all the right reasons on Facebook and Twitter because of the network effects they've created, we're equally as interested in the tails of social media. Where do enthusiasts live? The web, the forums, the blogs, the places where they talk about what they love. And I think you're going to see more folks starting to push out there with new technologies to really try to scale out into the tails of social media because of the enormous power out there. And so I think it's the early days, quite honestly, and a lot of fun stuff is going to happen over the next several years.
I think we think of social commerce as very distinct to Airbnb, and it means bringing online offline. So we feel like a lot of things before Airbnb meant bringing offline online, and we think Airbnb is very much bringing online offline. And we are now connecting millions of people around the world. It's actually really cool because we can create a world map and show which countries we've connected to other countries. And Americans were connected with residents in 90 different countries last year. I believe Australians were connected with people in 60 different countries. And we can go country by country and look. And if you kind of bring those all together, almost every single country has been connected with another country on the planet, with minus the 2 countries I mentioned. And it's very intimate. Social commerce in our sense is very intimate, because there's 3 really intimate things that you can do online or offline. The first thing is that you're paying somebody else money. A financial transaction is a very intimate transaction, so you're paying money. Another thing you're doing is you're meeting people in real life that you don't know. So the idea of meeting somebody in the real world that you met on the internet, 10 years ago there was even a stigma to that. I think it's pretty accepted today, where we're combining that with money, but we're adding a third thing. And that third thing is now you're in the home with the person. So if you combine those 3 things, that is an incredibly unique, kind of intimate transaction. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think one of the customers for one of our portfolio companies, Zimride, said, my life becomes more interesting when I open my door. And I thought that would really capture this notion of what a lot of people are calling collaborative commerce, or the the sharing economy. And I thought what I'd love to do is dive a little bit more deeply into that concept, Brian, around what is it about today that makes this kind of sharing and collaborative culture possible?
Yeah, we've been struggling with that in a sense. When people hear about our concept, well, it depends. I think in 2007 when people heard about our concept, they thought, are you crazy? So that was I think what my mom said and what some of my friends said. Of course, they don't say it at the time. They say it like a year later, like, let me tell you what I really thought. Because at the time, they're like really supportive. Oh, it's excellent. A year later, like, yeah, I thought you were crazy. So there were things that I think had to happen on the internet before you could do all those kind of intimate things. In other words, you could argue you had to do all those 3 things in our websites to do all those 3 things distinctly. So paying other people, that happens on eBay. Before eBay, there was a huge stigma to doing that, and people were not comfortable. There's a day people wouldn't buy anything online, let alone pay another person online. So that had to happen. Meeting people from the internet 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, that was really, there's a huge stigma. Today, not a big deal. And sharing space with people from online. That happens every day on Craigslist. Maybe you get your roommate, right? A lot of people in this room probably found, or maybe after you graduate, you'll find roommates on Craigslist. The average person probably has. So Airbnb, I think in many ways, just picked all 3 of those and they converged them. So they were already doing it, but we had to allow all these other websites to kind of happen first, and then you kind of bring them all those unique things together.
What about trust, though?
What kind
of issues do you find with that?
So I think that's one of the other reasons. I think trust is the currency of our marketplace. And the way our site works is, you can book space with people or stay with people all over the world, and trust is the mechanism that allows that. We allow you to connect to Facebook. You can see who their friends are. The real key, though, is the reviews. They're transactional-based reviews. So after you stay with somebody, you leave a transactionally based review. That's a quantitative score, various things about them, and they leave a reciprocal review. We have 24/7 customer support, and as we build this user base of profiles with reviews, you're basically building a trusted community marketplace. It's a currency that over time, now it's really hard to get going because no one really wants to be the first person without a review to book another person without a review. And so there's really a long story of why Airbnb took a really long time to get going. And now we have hundreds of thousands of reviews. One of the new features we're going to be coming out with is to allow you, if you don't yet have reviews, you can self-select to saying, I want to stay with Stanford alumni around the world. So maybe you're going to Tokyo, where there are probably some Stanford alumni that we can connect you to as well. So trust can come through being earned, or it can come through affinity groups as well.
So communities is a really important part of
Absolutely.
I feel like that's also, in some ways, with One Kings Lane, what's really interesting is that you guys have really focused on one particular vertical and getting a lot of credibility within that vertical. And I just want to dive a little bit more deeply into that concept. Have you guys thought about moving into other verticals? And why did you pick this one in particular?
Yeah, actually we haven't. And laser focused by the founders, saying we want to drive deep and really truly deliver on the needs of consumers in the home and living category versus I came from eBay where we sold everything to everybody, and it's daunting. It's hard to deliver a really rich experience in a given category if you got to serve 50, 60, 70 categories. And so we're very laser focused on this category in large part because it's incredibly fragmented on the retail side. These folks really felt the pain when the economy turned down, particularly the high end of the industry. Those brands collapsed, the magazines collapsed. They're looking for a solution to sell their goods to consumers without degrading the brand experience, and really needed a place like One Kings Lane. Just like Gilt Group has done in the apparel industry, they need a place to move their merchandise while they keep their brand high and really well thought of. And on the consumer side, it's challenging for consumers as well. You ask most consumers what their design tastes are, and they say eclectic, because they don't know. That's basically, I don't know what they are. And so what they're looking for is people to help them, guide them, curate, give them a sense of how they can build things out one at a time, make it less intimidating, really starting to democratize the industry, which, by the way, fashion was democratized 10 years ago. The internet really ripped it out into mainstream. It didn't happen in home. That's what we're really looking to do, is make it a whole lot less intimidating on the consumer side, the buyer side, and really be a solution to the retail side, which is challenged right now.
I'd like to dive in a little bit more into the concept of curation that you bring up, because it feels like, particularly for groups like Gilt Group or One Kings Lane, and I've seen this with a ModCloth, one of the things that develops a brand is actually a point of view as to what your brand should be about. And it's something that differentiates these types of e-commerce companies from what I call, Commerce 1.0, where you're creating essentially a database of all the products that could be sold as an Amazon. It feels like there's a strong tie between this curation concept and social commerce. What do you think is that tie?
Yeah, I mean, I think curation is the secret sauce, and we actually, as a company, one of the first things I did when I got there, the founders said, really bring our brand to life, articulate it, put it on paper, dimensionalize it, so as we hire new people, we get bigger, we don't lose sight of who we are and what we're all about, and that's kind of rare for companies. The challenge is, coming from eBay, it was not curated, trying to curate. That's tough. It's easier to start with a very tight experience and walk and walk and walk and give more powers to the consumer, make it more social, allow consumers to sell to other consumers. And that's where everyone aspires to do. It's just really hard to do tight curation and scale, and that's the magic. If you can make both of those work, which I think Airbnb is doing a phenomenal job of making them both work, that is really the solution. And I'm biased that I think driving deep in categories, being very focused on a narrow set of consumers and segments is a winning solution going forward.
So to challenge that notion, going on to Groupon, you guys have really sort of expanded really, really fast, and it doesn't necessarily feel like there's really a lot of curation. How do you think through that kind of social commerce? Do you want to move in a more curated direction, or do you want to just kind of provide offers to the masses?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is it may not be as well known, but we actually do a lot of curation. So we have an editorial staff of probably 100 or more people that are writing up the daily deal write-ups on a daily basis, and that's just a lot of content. I think there's a stat out there about how much content is created by an editorial team, and it's something like thousands of newspapers worth on a daily basis for every deal that we run in every city we're in. So curation is something that we sort of value fairly highly. The trust factor you were talking about, we are curators of local experiences. So we have to pick out the best ones. We use other review sites as well and look at, what the reputations of those businesses are elsewhere, as well as in discussing with them to determine just how good those businesses are. But, end of the day, when someone buys a Groupon, they expect it to be a great experience. And if the local merchant can't deliver on that because of whatever reason, whether it's our fault or not, we suffer for that. So we try to be very careful in terms of making sure the merchants are ready for the onslaught of customers they have, making sure that they do actually provide good experiences. But then there's the challenge of growth. So then how do you continue to grow when you're curating so heavily? And I think that's just something that our business and One Kings Lane and we all have to deal with as we're trying to create a great customer experience while still growing massively over geographies and internationally and over categories.
Can I just build on that real quick? I said the best thing is everyone thought the solution to curation was math. Algorithms will tell you how to do everything. And I think that's where everyone went wrong. And this notion of personalization and curation is really balancing the editorial and the algorithms. You got to get both right. That's where the secret's going to come. It's just really hard to make the math work and scale it. And that's why I think Groupon's doing so well is they're balancing both sides of the equation and really doing some amazing things.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think one of the things that I see in entrepreneurs is that they because I teach mostly in the engineering school, a lot of these students come in thinking that the computers can solve the problems. And one of the most compelling parts of investing in ModCloth in particular was there was a woman there who really understood the community and the customer she was selling to. So I think that's definitely a core component. Now, we've looked through sort of 3 different types of the social commerce business. I'd love to ask Brett, in terms of when you think about investing in these types of companies, then we've looked at curation, this kind of concept of collaborative commerce and what makes that successful. Even with these sales sites, the concept of community and how communities will also help these couponing sites. How do you think about evaluating these types of companies? What's the most important component for you?
Right. So there's not one component that's stands out kind of head and shoulders above everything else, but I think there are some themes that we're in general very excited about. I think the 3 panelists here that are operators I think really represent some of those themes. I'd say one of the biggest things we're excited about in terms of social e-commerce really is kind of what Brian said earlier, which is taking the paradigm from bringing people on the internet to taking people off the internet. And so Airbnb, in a lot of ways, I think was an unlikely inaugural company to do this because of all the miracles that I think Brian had to overcome. But we're seeing lots more marketplaces that the internet enables social commerce on, but is not really on the internet in a traditional way. So some examples of that are a company called ThreadUp, based in San Francisco, which enables parents to send each other boxes of clothes when their kids outgrow them. So it's taking a very social practice that happened long before there was an internet. People would say, oh, my 2-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old just outgrew these clothes. I'm now waiting for an in-law or someone else to give them to, but now the internet empowers this practice, and you can share with only Stanford alumni or only people of in a certain groups or everybody. And there's these platforms now where the internet's touching that in a little bit, in the sense it's not happening on the internet, it's happening kind of in people's houses as they pack up the boxes and print out the labels, but the internet is ubiquitously letting this happen. And so things like ThreadUp, things like Getaround or Relay Rides, which are kind of like the Airbnb for cars. So there's this collaborative consumption, again, through the mobile device, allowing the internet to kind of, go through this whole platform and enable this to happen without people even going on a web page and surfing around in kind of a social experience. And so I think those type of marketplaces that are inherently social, that are happening offline, are really interesting from an investment perspective because A, they're marketplaces and they're really stable and hard to dislodge over time, but B, they're taking behavior that is just really kind of has been happening for a long time and making it more powerful and more extensible in lots of ways. So I think that's one thing that's been really exciting. There's other themes too, but I think that's kind of this next generation of social e-commerce.
I saw Brian, you were smiling when he was saying it's the Airbnb of something. Feels like
really
that means you really know you've made it when people are saying that.
When we launched, we said we were the eBay of space. It's funny how we came up with that name. So we did Y Combinator, and you guys probably know about Y Combinator. It's this, he doesn't like to call himself an incubation. I guess you could say it's this kind of seed program where they give you $20,000 and it has a bit of a collegial feel. There's like typically 20 or 30 companies that will enter twice a year to this 12-week program. Every week there's a notable speaker, and this all leads to this final day called Demo Day. So leading up to Demo Day, we were trying to explain what we were, and I remember Paul Graham, people at the time couldn't get their heads around if there was a real business here. And there's notably like couch surfing, and a lot of people originally thought we were like couch surfing. Now today we have a lot of homes, we have like really big spaces, we have castles, we even have cars and boats and all sorts of spaces. But back then it was mostly bedrooms, and airbeds and living rooms. And so Paul Graham says, you should say you're the eBay of space, because eBay was a marketplace, they were really big, they were a $1 billion company, and everyone has space. It was so matter of fact, I'm like, yeah, we're the eBay space. And at the time we weren't I don't know if we really like could say we were, because we're pretty much the eBay of bedrooms, but now we really have moved into any type of unique space. And the thing we like to say is if eBay could become a $1 billion company by monetizing the stuff in your home, well, how big could a company be if they monetize the home, which is basically 25% of your annual assets, and the backyard, the front yard, all those, basically all that kind of space. And the one other thing maybe I'll say, just to follow up on Brett's point, was I think in many ways social commerce is the way things always were and the way they will be. And I think it was kind of post-World War II, there was this period of maybe 60 years, at least in our space, where it wasn't like that. And the story goes like this. So we came up with a concept. I told my mom about it. My mom's probably 59 years old, baby boomer, and she thought we were crazy. And most of her friends probably thought we were crazy. And I told my late grandfather about it. My grandfather grew up in the Great Depression, and he said, of course. And I go, what do you mean, of course? Well, he had done this when he was growing up. Of course, there was no internet, but there weren't modern hotels like we know today. People would stay in bed and breakfast, in inns, or in private residences. The word Southern hospitality, really means like taking people into your homes, and they have that symbol, a pineapple, which is a symbol of hospitality. They used to have pineapples at the ends of your bed. So in other words, this is how people have been traveling since biblical times. It's, a hotel 100 years ago looked like a bed and breakfast today. A bed and breakfast 100 years ago looked like Airbnb today. And so, it was really, I think, 1960 that like a Marriott, or Hilton started really taking off. So this idea that we're the new way is kind of true, but at the same time, it's what people were doing for a really long period of time. And I think for a period of time, there was this idea that strangers were being connected from so many different places, and there was this absence of trust and reputation and any kind of currency. And I think finally all those things came back together, and now you're seeing all these things happening.
Yeah, and it feels like it's a rich space for a lot of different types of startups actually
Right,
to start popping up, which is why we're seeing sort of the Airbnb of lots of different types of companies.
I add just one thing to that, because I think it's an interesting point, related to the fact that this is how things used to be. I think a lot of these social businesses can be proven out by entrepreneurs at an early stage without any technology at all. And so one really interesting example of that is the Rent the Runway story, where Jen and Jenny had this idea to be the Netflix of kind of aspirational dresses. So instead of buying a $1,500 dress, you can rent that dress for $100 through Rent the Runway, and they'll send it to your house. Well, they had this idea coming out of Harvard Business School, and when they met with us, we basically said, prove it. And they said, well, we have to hire all these engineers, we have to build this front end, we have to build this back end. We said, no, don't do that. Just go to, you pick the venue, but they decided to do it at sorority parties at Yale, Harvard, Princeton. And they showed up at sorority parties. In advance, they had sent out invitations to rent dresses. They showed up with a small inventory of dresses just to test to see if people would pay money to rent the dresses, what happened to a dress at a sorority party, how it came back, could it be reused, lots of things they learned without any technology at all. And so I think a lot of these social proof points can be really proved out, and because I think the technology is what lets it scale massively, but the technology is usually never, the business in itself. And so I think that was a really interesting anecdote, and I think it applies to a lot of social commerce businesses.
Yeah, we actually have a very similar story with Chegg when we were, Chegg came from a pivot out of Craigslist for colleges, basically, and Facebook came out with Craigslist, and so we were like, okay, well, we can't really be Craigslist for colleges anymore. And they had this idea, well, everyone is exchanging textbooks on this site, and so let's try to pivot there. So instead of creating a whole new site with the Chegg brand on it, they created a site called Textbook Flicks. And then what we did was we got an Amazon Prime account, and kids would come in. I think we had 1,000 students that first quarter come in, try to rent a textbook. We'd buy it off of Amazon and ship it for free out to these students. And they would call and say, I just got a box from Amazon. We're like, yeah, just send it back to us when you're done. And it was extraordinarily successful from that perspective. We got to test out exactly as was mentioned here by Brett, whether or not students would return the textbooks, what state did they return it in, and being able to test all that hypotheses out before really even launching the business was extraordinarily valuable. So I think that's very much true for a lot of these types of businesses, as was proven out by Airbnb. Another question then, going back to One Kings Lane, it's a little bit of a different type of business with Airbnb, but I wanted to go back to this notion that you were talking about how you would use your community actually to help inform some of the back end of your business. And I think that's a really interesting concept, because it feels like social commerce, then what you're saying, is not just people coming and buying stuff. It's actually some of the information that they're providing you to help you optimize your business. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, one of the big things we're going to try to do over the next year or so is more of our merchandising on the site. We do it all ourselves, and it's beautiful. It's very expensive to do. It looks great. But we want our consumers to do the merchandising. So more user-generated content because I can tell a story and I can paint a picture of a room. If I can get a consumer to do the same thing, it's much more powerful. It's much more authentic. It's much more real. And so over time, the site will come more from our consumers. The merchandising, the aspiration, all the ideas will come from them, because consumers actually have more trust in other consumers who share like-minded interests than they do in folks like us. They love our stuff. They trust people who are like them. And so more and more the look and the feel, the merchandising, it appears on the site, the recommendations, you name it, will come from our consumer base. And we think that's very powerful. And again, it goes back to the notion that no one has really cracked the notion of amazing content and amazing content, woven it together to provide context that really inspires, surprises, and delights consumers. And I think that's the next wave you're going to see. And again, it's not math. It's math and editorial woven together. And we think the editorial from our consumers is much more powerful.
Great. And then, Brett, going back to then the concept of Groupon, it feels like there's just, with the wild success of Groupon, there's been a billion other Groupon clones that have been born. How, as a company, do you stay ahead of that? Do you think that there's room for everyone, or as there's more competition, does that create problems for a business like Groupon? How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a lot of companies that have pivoted to this space, whether they were in it to begin with, and other companies such as Yelp or even Google kind of coming in and trying to be in the space. I think, to us that's a it's sort of flattery, I guess, in some sense, because the company has done so well. I think the thing we hear from the merchant standpoint that's very interesting is that, as a merchant now locally, you get calls from countless daily deal sites all the time. And so while some of the fatigue on the user standpoint for how many emails can you actually subscribe to, daily deal emails, there's sort of a question there. It doesn't take that long necessarily to read an email. On the merchant side, to engage with a salesperson from 10 different daily deal sites, that can be really tiring. And so I think there's an interesting dynamic going on where there are maybe 100 copycat companies in the Bay Area. They're all calling on the same merchants, sort of we want to work with, and that we have worked with. And to a certain extent, these merchants, they want to work with us because they need new customers, but they need to be dedicating 99% of their time to running their business and making sure that that's profitable and making sure that it's running well. A daily deal site for them is a way to acquire new customers that are loyal, that come back in the door time and time again, but they can't spend too much time, working with us. We need to make it really easy for them. And so I think the more sort of options there are for them, the more it actually helps us to a certain extent, and more that helps some of the leaders in the space that have larger subscriber lists that are at a greater scale than some of the people who have looked at the model and said, oh, it's so easy, I just need to start selling local businesses. And then quickly sort of learn, well, there is actually a network effect here. It's just localized. It's not the same network effect that's at play at eBay. It's all within San Francisco. It's all within Palo Alto. It's all within Chicago. So I think there's some dynamics out there that some people talk about but don't really think through all the way, that I think will contribute to having scale as an advantage for us across multiple marketplaces.
But if each merchant is getting 10, 15 calls from every other coupon site, does that make it a race to the bottom in terms of margins for companies like yours, or is it one or two survivors will really emerge in terms of we have a big subscriber base, and so therefore that's what we offer?
Yeah, I think the subscriber base is the key thing there. For them, again, I think that it's more about, I want to be able to get the right number of customers in and sort of the right cadence, and sort of less about the margin itself. These merchants are ones that, again, they can operate. They know they operate good businesses. They know once they get someone in the door that they can convince them to come back in. A lot of times, very local merchants. So it's not as much like a Taco Bell where the person that's sort of serving them, doesn't get to know that customer. They take pride in every customer that comes in their door. They want to get to know them. That's where that sort of social aspect. It's funny you were mentioning how it used to be. Like, I think of a lot of ways what we do socially is we sort of give these local merchants the ability to reconnect with their local consumers in a way that hasn't been seen in the United States in a long time. I lived in Spain for a year in 2004, and I became a local at a bar. And I'd never done that in America. I'd never gotten to know someone that actually served me food and gave me drinks, and we were friends. And that's for us, I think, the ultimate success for Groupon. Can we create that sort of dynamic, through the internet, through mobile, in sort of a local basis?
Great.
But just to tie that all back, I think, to this the social discussion, one massive barrier I think that Groupon can have at scale is that they can push social promotions that are curated because of your social graph and basically drive the right consumers to the right merchants and the right deals to the right consumers in a way that, once you have that scale, upstarts can't do that well. And I think that's definitely one really exciting thing about once you hit scale doing group buying that other people can't touch you. So I think that's I don't know if you guys have proven that out yet, but I'm sure you're working on that.
Data, at scale in sort of any business is definitely an advantage. And having the resources to sort of take that data and figure out what it means and then apply it to your product, then, that's something that we think about a lot. We spend a lot of effort on.
Yeah.
Great. So just sort of, I wanted to gather some final thoughts from each of you on where do you think this all goes over the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years? It feels like social commerce on some levels has reached a maturity in terms of what it actually is, but it feels like there's also a lot more that it can actually do, and there's a big promise aspect to social commerce. So before we turn it over to the audience for questions, I'd love to get your perspectives on where does this all go in the next 2 to 3 years? Start with Brian.
So, I know a lot of entrepreneurs that they have slide decks, and in your slide deck, in our slide deck, we had to make a giant guess on the marketplace, and we had to make a guess on would this work. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people now have our logos in their slide decks, and they say, and I get Google alerts for Airbnb, and every so often you'll see Airbnb for cars, Airbnb for events, Airbnb for food, Airbnb for tutoring. And so we're like proving this model now, which is really interesting. I think that now that we've proven this at a certain scale, it's really like opened up the door of their imagination to all the other ways you can connect. And I really think it's all these different industries. I think for Airbnb, the one thing I can say with certainty is that it's going to grow quite significantly geographically. We're a site that was global from day one. And the reason we were global, and it's very different than Groupon, we're local, but we bring locals together from around the world. It's not an insular community. So basically, like we started in London, Paris, New York. People travel these cities from tens of thousands of cities around the world. And so there's this natural built-in network effect that happened, where they came from these thousands of cities around the world. They booked, they stayed in New York. They go back to wherever they came from, and we remarketed to them, essentially, and that's all it was. And they would say, well, you had a great experience. You should rent your place. You should tell other people about it. Unless you're homeless, by definition, you have space. You can rent out on Airbnb. That was essentially what we had said to them. And it really started to grow. And so I think this is something that's spreading internationally. And even with our platform, it's spreading to into different categories. We see ourselves not limited to bedrooms or even necessarily houses. We have many people renting all different types of spaces. A few weird use cases that are being facilitated today are when people first move to a city now, Airbnb is an incredibly common use case. Let's say you have to go to DC next week. You just found out you got a job, and you're not finding an apartment on Craigslist from another city to a different Craigslist when you can't even tour the apartments and you have to rush. Like, that doesn't really work. People use Airbnb now for neighborhood sampling. I want to try out a neighborhood once a week and see what it's like. So that's really, really common. And there's a lot of unexpected things. People are even renting out other people's homes for dinner parties, which I thought was unbelievable. So
that's a great idea. I'm gonna do that.
It's like, why get a really nice house? Get a small house, and then if you want to impress somebody, rent a big house for the night. So, to some extent, I guess what I'm going is, we think the platform allows people to project what they want onto it. So the future for Airbnb and for these marketplaces is, if we create really dynamic platforms, people are going to find uses for it. They're going to realize, I have this. We never thought people would even put up their entire homes. We never thought people would put up tree houses. One day, a professor at Harvard decided he rented his house. He had a tree house in his backyard that he probably built for his kids. His kids went to college. One day, he decides to rent out his tree house. His tree house is now getting more bookings than the house, and the tree house has paid for the mortgage on the house. So it's pretty crazy.
When people rent out other people's houses, do they lie about it being their house, or do they what is that dialogue
the dinner
like?
party one?
Yeah, the dinner party.
I have absolutely no idea about that one, but I wouldn't be surprised. It's actually a really good idea. Like, it'd be a great way to impress a date. You know?
Yeah.
Greg.
So, I mean, the notion of maturity in social commerce, I think it's so early. I think e-commerce overall is really early stages. I mean, right now the share of e-commerce overall retail is the same as the catalog business, which is somewhat embarrassing. I could say that because I've been in this business for 10, 12 years, and I'm as much a culprit as anybody else. And I think this is just going to unlock things that the internet was supposed to do 10 years ago. We think back, and I was supposed to be able to get an incredibly personalized experience for me, for anyone in this room, as it relates to e-commerce. That hasn't happened. And I think social, empowering more people to do that for other people is going to really, really awaken and help grow e-commerce in new and different special ways. And it's a lot about giving up control and allowing consumers, your social graph, to build your story for you. So I think it's early days. I mean, I think it's just getting started, but not just social commerce. I think e-commerce is just getting going in the next couple of years. I think there's just going to be things happening that have not happened since the early 2000s. So just an exciting time to be in the space.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with those thoughts. I mean, I think we're definitely, just at the very beginning of a really exciting phase. Almost like asking the question, what is the future of personal computing in 1980? It's just stuff you can't even dream about today. And I think we spent a lot of time talking about Airbnb, One Kings Lane, Groupon, which are all massively successful businesses. But from a venture perspective, we've been seeing different use cases that are equally social and commercial and kind of marry those two in totally different applications. So things like there's I don't know how many people are familiar with just startups like Fascism or Go Try It On, where you can basically take a picture of yourself wearing something, and because there's enough users on the site, you get instant feedback on, yeah, definitely buy that because you're in a dressing room at Neiman Marcus or Macy's. And that kind of social feedback on that one use case is just really interesting. And so I think there's everything from personalized closet and kind of mobile devices enabling kind of real-time sharing both with your friends and to other people as you buy. Just we haven't seen anyone really scratch the surface on that. So I think it's very, very exciting the next 3+ years.
It's definitely new. I mean, I think there's two dynamics we're going to see expanding over time. One is the sort of enriching of that social dynamic. So, in Airbnb's case, what are those interesting interactions that are happening when the person is at that house, and how do they make that experience better for both parties? For Groupon, same thing. How do we make that experience end to end better for each user and for each merchant? And then the second is really just mobile, and I think you touched on it. All the things that are coming out with GPS, with cameras, front and back. What are the things that you can build into your product, or new sort of interactions that are made easier just by the fact that you have this with you all the time? This is becoming the most important device, the most important technology that there is. People get nervous, they get anxiety if it's actually taken away from them. And so how can you use this device to actually make things more social? Those are really the two dynamics I see.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'd like to open it up for any questions from the audience. We have half an hour for that. Yes.
I have a question about the network effects that a lot of you talked about, and how you, when you start one of these social businesses and you need to gain momentum quite quickly and get people on board, and the issue of trust, how you went through that initial stage of getting people to buy into the idea, start using the service, and get to the tipping point where it starts to go viral and people are thinking this is an amazing idea. So if you can talk through that process, would be interesting.
Well, you referenced the tipping point, which I think is kind of a concept that Groupon, is fundamental to Groupon early on, and the idea is that unless we sold enough of a particular deal, the deal wasn't actually valid. So your credit card actually wouldn't be charged until, and still isn't charged until, that tipping point is met. The incentive that creates then is to share that on Facebook, share that on email, share it on Twitter, share a link via instant message, what have you. And so we certainly use that, especially early on, in order to try to get past that tipping point and create incentives basically to share things. That's definitely a huge part of it.
So in our case, the first 100 users at Airbnb were related to one of the founders. So, and that's that. If you're starting a website, then you should force your friends and family to sign up, because assume that whatever you make is not good enough on day one for people that don't know you to actually be compelled to use it. And so those people are essentially your test subjects. And so just get your friends to use it. Assume that you have a minimum viable product. And we basically launched 4 times, and I think when we met Anne, that was our 3rd launch. We actually had, at the timeline, it was October 2007, 2 designers, without an engineer, came up with a really simple website. March 2008, we had this notion, we're going to create a website we can provide airbeds for conferences around the United States. That didn't really take off. And then the summer of 2008, we built the site you see today. We basically got all of our friends and family to kind of use it. Then we sent out little blog posts, and all of our press, and we used press to get a lot of traction. And it was always an inverse pyramid where you start at the bottom and you work your way up. National media doesn't, in startups, aren't actually looking for necessarily breaking news like CNN or New York Times. Sometimes they are, but oftentimes what they're doing is they want to reference things that are already popular. So what you do is you start with your friends, you work your way out to people like friends of friends, then you go to small blogs. It's easy to get a small blog to write about you because they don't get that many emails. A really big blog is harder, and a really big blog is only going to write about you if the smaller blogs and other people are using you. And so then you get to newspapers, and you kind of work your way up. And we use the Democratic National Convention to do that. It was June 2008. We had no idea. We had this platform. It was a chicken and egg problem. Buyers want to go where sellers are. Sellers want to go where buyers are. It's kind of like trying to get all these people to make stuff into your store when no one's in your store. No one wants to actually put stuff in that store. That was a problem we had, and we figured, how do we actually solve this? And the way we decided to solve it was press. Denver, June 2008, the thing everyone was talking about was the Democratic National Convention and Barack Obama. We figured this was a very topical issue. We could leverage this to get a lot of press. So I remember one day we literally typed in DNC housing in Google News. All these reporters were writing about how the hotels are sold out. We're like, this is the perfect way for Obama supporters to come together. And they had just moved him from the 20,000-seat Pepsi Arena to an 80,000-seat football stadium. So there were thousands of people needed housing. And I probably emailed 800 people a day without exaggeration. Anyone would write about us. First, only small bloggers. Then people in Denver started listing. Then we got the local news. We literally called producers at every local television station. They started doing stories. Then the Rocky Mountain News, Denver Post started doing stories. Within a few weeks, we went CNN called us up. They want to do an interview in our living room, which is the weirdest thing in the world. They have CNN in your living room, and you're still an entrepreneur. And when you're an entrepreneur in no business, you're basically unemployed. There's it's more of a state of mind before you have business, right? You're I'm an entrepreneur, but you have to believe it. And there's one final anecdote, and that was during Y Combinator. Paul Buchheit was one of the speakers, and Paul Buchheit is the creator of Gmail, and he also coined Google's "Don't Be Evil" mantra. And he had this saying. He said, "A website needs 100 people that love you before you can take off." He said, "It's really people think they can find 100 people that love them. It's really, really hard. There's websites that have been around for 10 years that never found 100 people that love them. I mean, love." And Gmail took supposedly 2 years, he said, before you could find 100 people in Google that absolutely loved the service. And it probably took the same for Airbnb.
One slight build is one of the great things the founders did at One Kings Lane is focus on influencers. There's a big trend in marketing is in the valley is put all your money in Google, keywords, 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 rather than focusing your time, your energy on creating broadcast towers. Find the most influential people in your space and invest your time and energy on getting them on your side. Let them tell your message for you. And I also echo the notion there's a big guardrail. Everything is data, data, data. It's all about the mind. Old school PR is an incredible asset that I think a lot more companies, Zynga, used it extraordinarily well. It's just old school PR tactics. Not enough companies use it and marry the heart and the mind to really build that wave, that buzz that can give a catalyst to your network effect.
Yeah, I think I have less to add kind of operationally because I think all these tactical things and how you fight tooth and nail to get users make a lot of sense. I think from a conceptual or investor level, there's this really nice concept of social proof. And I think it's one of those things that I think, ex ante you can say, oh, that's a crazy idea. Who would do that? And, who would do this thing called Groupon? Why am I going to give them my credit card and sign up for this? Why am I going to open my house up to strangers? But it really doesn't take that many people to have this viral effect where someone who knows someone who's just making a ton of money on their treehouse, and then that really all of a sudden incents 10 people to put their houses up for dinner parties, or for them to buy high-end home decor online, or for them to use Groupon. So this idea of not only a couple users or 100 users who love you, but how quickly these social behaviors can spread and get validation, I think can happen really quickly. And so I think there's this moment maybe kind of early on where people are very skeptical, and maybe you were even skeptical as an entrepreneur, but in our experience, we've seen a lot of that change really, really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what Brian said, build a great product. And you build a great product, and it's so much easier than you think. And it sounds really easy to say, but you iterate until you have a great product, right? You go through 3, 4, 5 different iterations, getting, abusing your friends and family to try it out until they hate seeing, hitting your URL. But eventually it sort of snaps into play. And you see that story time and time again with startups, with products. I don't know if anyone knows Settlers of Catan, but the man who created that game literally spent 12 years building it and making his family play it every night, and it was never fun until the 12th year. And finally his family was like, okay, this game is really great, and they started actually having fun, and he knew he had a product, and so you just have to keep on trying, keep on iterating. It can be a grind, though.
Yes.
A question on Groupon and how consumers are viewing it now that it's a mature company and has very wide reach in terms of the social commerce concept we've been talking about today. Initially, you had the group buying model. I believe you don't have that anymore. So if you think of group buying as kind of a subset of social commerce, now if I get an email from Groupon that there is a deal at such and such location, I can basically act on it personally, or I can decide not to do it. And many merchants apparently use that as a customer acquisition method. In fact, they say that margins are so low for them, it's hard for them to make money. So how do you build that loyalty towards merchants when consumers are basically getting a deal? And I want to see where's the social concept in there for that.
Well, first of all, I don't know how mature we are, but we're more mature than we used to be. You have kind of two questions there, one around the consumer side of things, one around the merchant side of things. The thing that I think that's really interesting from a product sense about the concept of a deal, or the word deal, is that a deal to a user is content. It's something that people enjoy, coupon clipping. They like to read about deals. You get the circular, the Best Buy circular, and sort of read through it for fun on Sunday afternoon. And to a merchant, it's an ad. It's a promotion. And so that creates a pretty powerful dynamic between a merchant and a user in sort of that communication mechanism of what a sort of a deal is specifically. That word alone is just really, really powerful. The social dynamic, as I said before, I think is really between the merchant and the consumer, and the transaction, the exchange of cash in return for services or goods, that happens as part of commerce is the primary, most important sort of a link between them. Facebook talks about the graph in general, and there's all sorts of things that friends do to each other. They share photos with each other. They comment to each other on their walls. They email. They send messages. Between a merchant and a user, it's really about that transaction, and then there are other things, ancillary things that sort of surround that. So discussions or comments or reviews or what have you. But it's all driving towards that one purchase. So for us, the most important thing is that we can drive those purchases. So we drive that primary interaction, get users that love that experience, that it's around where they live, and therefore they've seen it, they're now familiar with it, they're likely to go back. They talk to the owner of that business, and now they feel a connection to it. And on the merchant standpoint, the hardest thing to do really is to get users a lot of times. I've seen this sort of firsthand. We recently moved to Chicago last year, and my wife has started up an education service. So it's sort of like a Montessori-inspired pre-K program, and she has a great product. She's really smart. It's an incredible, incredible product, but she literally just cannot find ways to get people in the door. We tried going around putting flyers everywhere. We tried to get coffee shops to sort of send things out via newsletter, and nothing really worked except for word of mouth. Nothing at all. Even a free class. And so I've seen firsthand just how hard it can be on a local basis to get merchants or to get users in the door. But once they do that, most of these merchants are sort of very successful. So I don't know, that was kind of a long-winded. I don't know if that answers all of your questions, but I think we know that once we build a great product for the consumer and make sure the merchant is happy, and 98% of our merchants want to work with us again, that's all we really have to do to be successful.
What effect do you see virtual currency having on the whole social platform? More for Mr. Garrett from an investment standpoint.
Virtual currency, I think, on its own is, in the way I look at it now, and I definitely am not an expert on virtual currency, but I see it as kind of just something that removes friction from a system. Like on Facebook and having virtual currency, instead of having to trust every merchant, you can buy virtual currency from Facebook and then use that, and that's fungible for everybody. But I don't see that necessarily accelerating, any social commerce, more than it would without virtual currency. I think it removes some friction, but I don't think it's massively disruptive on its own.
This is for Groupon. I think Groupon does an excellent job getting customers in for the front door for the first time. But how do you measure for the local businesses sustained purchases over time? I know you're a newer company, so it's probably hard to measure over the long run. But what mechanisms are in place to do that? And also, do you think that having that measurement, how critical do you see that to the long run success of Groupon?
Yeah, I mean, we're investing sort of more and more over time into different ways of sort of measuring. It's a really hard problem. There's actually a lot of, I think, very interesting startups out there that are doing some interesting things related to local analytics. And again, it all actually comes back to this device. So the only way you can really sort of measure and track someone is if they have sort of a smartphone device that you can somehow establish a signal with, right? At least on sort of massive scale. There are other things around redemption, redemption of a code, or purchases, via credit card, what have you. But in a local space, it's really hard because everyone has different point of sale systems and everyone transacts in slightly different ways. And so there's really no one size fits all solution. So you kind of have to solve the problem from a number of different angles. And it's something that's definitely very important to us. It's important to our merchants. They have a sense for it if they don't know the exact numbers. We're definitely investing in it.
So what sort of role do you see kind of rich media content, especially on the user-generated side, affecting purchasing behavior across these social platforms?
Greg, you want to take that?
Yeah, I would say huge. I mean, I think just unlocking the creativity in consumers and just setting it loose is going to be incredibly powerful, inspiring to other consumers to shop, to navigate. We did research back when I was at eBay that said, honestly, consumers trust consumers more than they trust third-party reviews, trust companies, but no one has really unlocked it. And the key is once you do that, you have to kind of curate it because you just don't want that massive content where 80% of it is just really bad and the 20 gets lost in there. You got to find the great content, elevate that, shine a light on it, but it's incredibly powerful if you can get a scalable content environment. Consumers will love it and they're thirsting for it. They're saying more. Help me get that information. So very powerful.
I think a good place to look for the impact of that is like QVC or HSN, where you see consumers calling in or writing in about different products and how that impacts the sales on those sites. It's absolutely staggering.
And that's what HSN has done a great job of. And gosh, that was 10, 15 years ago. They told a story and they sold product. And that really hasn't happened online, is tell me a story and then sell me things around it, inspire me, drive serendipity. It really hasn't happened scale beyond the internet. And I think that's going to start happening more and more.
Yes.
This online trust and identity of individuals and businesses seem to be quite a problem. Brian, you mentioned that it took a while to get your business going because nobody wanted to be the first and there were no reviews. And Greg, at Groupon, you mentioned that as the company is growing really fast and expanding, it's harder to curate the local businesses, etc. So can you comment on the online trust and the identity of individuals and businesses? How do you see this problem being solved?
So we've always seen it as just having a paper trail. So before us, so the vacation rental industry is a $100 billion industry worldwide. It's a huge industry. One of, I think, 5 people when they travel, they don't stay in a hotel. Previous to us, they were staying in another person's home. And the way a typical homeowner, like say you're going to use VRBO and you're going to rent out your vacation home, the things they used to do is they'd ask for a copy of their passport. They would ask you to send them a non-refundable deposit. They'd have a rental agreement, and they'd usually want to talk to you on the phone. And all they're trying to do is get a composite of who are you, why are you going there, and do I have some sort of like tracks about like who you are. And so we realized that eBay in many ways was able to prove this to some extent. But eBay, the profiles are still very one-dimensional, and they're not very robust. So what we decided was we were going to completely round out the story. We were going to take the profile from Facebook and associate it with financial transactions. And our users connect to bank accounts, to their credit card processing, payment systems. And through that, we now have a paper trail of who these people are, and so it's like walking down a well-lit street. As long as you can show who the people are and you can associate it to like payment methods, then over time, when you get that accumulation of reviews, then it really rounds it out. And I think of ourselves as not necessarily creating a platform for like homes around the world to stay in. What we're really doing is creating a platform of trusted profiles. Once you trust these people, you can exchange any type of commerce through that platform.
And let's reinforce that from eBay exactly, is transparency, transparency, transparency. More information, the better, and you also can never take your eye off. At the moment you take your eye off, trust, you don't stop innovating, you die, and it's hard to recover out of that. And so in a marketplace environment, trust, 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 trust. It's the secret sauce, what holds it and binds it all together.
But you said consumers may rely on the reviews, but often it's bad reviews that may have been entered by real users and get lost. 20 of them out of 1,000 or whatever. But how do you distinguish?
That's the curation. That's the curation, allowing people to score other consumers and really elevating as much information as possible and allowing that identity to surface. And more information, more transparent information is always the way to go. But you have to be involved in that. You just can't sit back and let it happen. You have to be an actively manage the trust environment within the ecosystem.
We've now are in the process of changing our reviews from purely qualitative to qualitative and quantitative. In fact, when you leave a review now, they're all quantitative, 1 through 5 stars, and I think 7 different categories. We don't publicly show this yet, but we've been collecting this data for about 4 months now, and that will be the next iteration of what we're releasing with reviews. I think it really is the next kind of level. And the other thing we're going to start doing is when you leave a review, a trip is really a story, and a review is really a story of your experience. We started realizing people would leave like 3-sentence reviews on Airbnb, but they did leave these huge blog posts about their trip because they want to share with their friends. Or on Facebook, they have like 20 photos of when they went to Costa Rica. We started realizing, what if those stories could come through inside of the profile, right? So what if like when you left a review, you were really leaving a story? You can leave photos. And I think that is going to be the kind of the future of where our review system starts to go, is it becomes much more robust. It's got data, it's got more rich content. So I think that's really like the key of it.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, within ModCloth, what we were seeing within the review site, I was just shocked at the amount of personal information that people would reveal. Like these women would say what their bust size was and what their waist size is and how big their hips are, and then they would say, fits great on me, and then I would say, well, I don't have that body type, so I can't possibly fit into that dress. And so that kind of the willingness with which people will share very personal information like a blog post about their trip isn't really surprising, because it's just sort of the modus operandi now of people on the social web. And I think that's what's really adding to the richness of what social commerce can really be. Yes?
So this is a question for Groupon. Every time I go and try to buy a coupon from Groupon, the second thing is I go to Yelp and find out more about the merchants. For last 2 months, I'm finding that Yelp is actually sending me emails. I did not sign up for any of these things, but Yelp is actually sending me much more targeted information, much more targeted coupons. And what I suspect is they're actually, and they have much more information about many other things that I check out on Yelp. So kind of how you plan to stop this customer acquisition by Yelp, this kind of passive customer acquisition by Yelp?
We really focus on sort of product and our consumers, experiences first and foremost. Yelp is a source of reviews for some of our consumers, and they do a really great job of capturing those user reviews. So, but for us, it's really about making sure we're delivering the most relevant deals to our users, and making sure that we're delivering a lot of value for our merchants, and we sort of figure out that everything else will figure itself out as long as we do that well. So I can't really comment too much about Yelp specifically, or any other player in the space.
In the back there.
So as you continue to make, so question for Groupon or Airbnb, as you continue to make acquisitions in the emerging economies, and so say you buy something in India which has 2 million users, I'm just giving an example. Do you then operate them as individual business units, or how do you make the decision to bring them onto the Groupon platform?
Do you have a company in India with 2 million users?
I'm just saying, for example,
Hypothetically. I don't really have much to add there specifically around sort of how we operationally look to expand either. I'm in the product group, so I focus mostly on the product.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done any acquisitions. What we do is, though we're in tens of thousands of cities, or 10,000 now, we do prioritize where we want to become dominant, and so where we want to put our resources. And so we made a list of the most important markets for us. We said, by the end of 2011, we want to make sure, even if there were competitors, they would not be able to unseat us in these dominant markets. It's like a giant game of Risk, and you're kind of saying, we want to identify this market and this market. So we say Buenos Aires is really important for us, or Tokyo, or Shanghai, or Beijing. And I think New Delhi is one of our markets that we're focusing on this summer. So we have a list of markets, and then we have various marketing initiatives, and then we put our money and resources towards these markets. And the only other thing is we try to find a diverse number of markets now. We're not interested in dominating in just New York, Boston, DC, LA. We want to dominate, or we want to just really use this as an opportunity to learn about different markets. So we'll enter a market in like Brazil, we'll enter Rio, and we'll use that to learn. And then we'll realize that, we're in Buenos Aires, and we'll realize that because of the banking crisis, I think it was in 2001, it's really hard for people to accept payments. And so in Argentina, the way we pay users is beyond PayPal and international ACH, we've actually are coming out with our own debit card that people can recharge. They can get an Airbnb debit card and they can recharge it to extract money, because it's really, really hard for people to get paid cross-border in Argentina. So every time you enter a new territory, there are interesting challenges like that. But if you can solve those early, then you essentially have a foothold. And
very cool. Yes.
A question on Groupon. So Groupon has been expanded in international market very aggressively. In regards to the joint venture size that you just launched in China, we've seen a lot of critiques or comments from outside press. And what I'm interested in is, from your perspective, could you talk a bit about Groupon's China strategy and how Groupon plans to tackle the challenges from the local competition?
Yeah, so China.
Brett's a product guy.
Yeah, the risk of sounding like a broken record. I mean, certainly, going back to the earlier question, I mean, we plan to be everywhere, in every market, in every city where, the daily deal business makes sense, where we have enough consumers and enough businesses that, want to get new consumers in the door and consumers that want deals. We believe that that's pretty much every market out there, every city, almost every town. And so we certainly plan, to be everywhere we can. And I can't comment. I don't have any real detailed, juicy secrets to tell you about China. But certainly China is a market that we're looking into.
One of you mentioned that going social isn't as simple as snapping on Facebook Connect, which is good insight.
Are there any tricks of the trade that you think are kind of becoming best practices for building a social site?
I'd say one of the basics is once you slap it on there, you still have to pull the content, pull the sharing. Because just left to its own devices, it might not perform. But if you coax it in a very colorful way and you really solicit it very authentically, have a conversation with your consumers, really pull their stories, pull the sharing, get them going, it's something you're starting to see more and more, very effective. But just leaving it static on the site, hidden, because it kind of gets lost on the page, not a best practice. But not a lot of companies yet have figured out how to get that conversation going and to coax and encourage people to share. I think ModCloth actually is one who does a great job, but others are starting to follow.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really struck me about social commerce is it's a way in which the consumer and the community actually owns the brand, and they participate in it and they promote it and they work with it, and I think that's what's unique, and that's what you see across the board here today is with Airbnb, you have people, meeting with one another, spreading it word of mouth, becoming extraordinary ambassadors for each other and for the brand. You see it within One Kings Lane. People are fanatical about the products that are being sold there. They trust the brand. They also promote the brand to one another. And you see that with Groupon, where people will share a Groupon deal on their Facebook wall, which is very unusual at the end of the day. How often do you share something that you bought on your Facebook wall? But people love doing that with Groupon. So it's how do you get your community really actively involved as consumers to promote and be a part of that brand. I think that's sort of one of the common themes.
One build on that, we find we do research in markets, so we show up, we do focus groups. We can't chase the people out of the room. They stay there all night. And we're like, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go. So again, sort of those old school tactics of just get your consumers together online or offline and let them go. You'll win if you can really get those like-minded people together. So this notion of meetups, people meeting offline and connect them online, offline, very powerful instrument to really engender ambassadors and brand loyalty and get that promotional effect going.
I think we have time for one or two last questions. Yes.
Quick one. For those of you who've had experience in international markets, do you see significant differences in online consumer behavior across different cultures or countries?
No, not at all. Majority of our revenue comes from outside the U.S. I think it's a fraction of our business is just domestic business. There are unique things about people all over the world, but what surprised us most wasn't how different people were, but how fundamentally similar they were, regardless of the culture. And there were so many questions about, well, people have different expectations about all different vectors, whether it's cleanliness or hospitality in these different cultures. And yet, whether or not a booking is domestic, in other words, whether an American books another American, or somebody from India books somewhere in the US, the review scores are always consistent. There isn't a wide variety of difference. The differences are always subtle. They're like, so our vision is, what we've designed is the booking experience, the mechanism to connect people. And we don't want an Airbnb experience to be throughout the home. That's a very local experience. We want the mechanism to connect people. And I think just the proliferation of Facebook nearing, 600 million users, a lot of these things, and eBay had already gone through this. So a lot of this stuff had already been solved, and we're kind of like that final. And maybe one other thing in our space is interesting is what we do is primarily not an American concept. It's primarily an international concept. If there was a center for us, our Hollywood would be the EU, so Europe, and it really spreads from there. So.
Any differences? I say I agree on the consumer side, not really. Supply chain, retail infrastructure, shipping really adds to the diversity in the markets. Consumers are much more similar than they are different, but go find the inefficiency. I mean, there's inefficiency in Europe and supply chains that companies are taking advantage of, but it's more other sides that are driving the different models that are forming.
So we've talked a lot about social and virality on the consumer side, call that the demand side, but I was wondering how you think about it on the supply side, particularly with Groupon and One Kings Lane. You have merchants selling goods. You have to go out and spend money to acquire them, to attract them. How do you think about expanding that supply base?
All right. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, we've sort of gone from a place of, a scrappy startup trying to get more businesses to work with us. And I think even early on, this sort of limitation of a deal a day was, in large part due to the fact that it's hard to get more partners on board when you're a small company, right? Sort of because of that limitation, not in spite of it. For us, we do want to, continue to roll out, and there's sort of this growth imperative that we're looking at, but at the same time, we need to curate and make sure we're only working with sort of the very best merchants. And so there's a fine balance for us as we sort of try to expand how many businesses we work with. We try to get better at serving the right deals to the right people at the right time, so that can help us, doing some optimization there. But other than that, it's a bit of a challenge for us to actually grow without, becoming a company that dilutes the type of product we provide.
Great.
A quick follow-up.
Sure.
Have you seen a switch in kind of incoming versus outgoing retailer acquisition? I mean, I imagine to start with, you had to be calling people or going on the foot to talk to them. Are you getting incoming calls now? People who are interested in setting up Groupons, and do you have any numbers around that?
Yeah, we get a lot of incoming calls. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific numbers, but
they advertise in American Idol now.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I think the sort of officially sort of published stat that's out there is we turn away 7 out of 8 merchants, or we can only work with 1 out of 8 merchants, right? And I think it sort of speaks to the concept we talked about earlier, which is just it's hard to get users, it's hard to get consumers in your door as a local merchant, and that's the main thing we're here to do for those merchants.
Well, Brett, Greg, and Brian, thank you so much for your time. This is very informative.
Thank you.